Yeah, next week on Wednesday, March 5th, in
Right.
the evening at 6:30 on Zoom, we are launching a really exciting project, our storytelling project, where we're going to be helping people form teams in 4 key areas of the state. And so I'm hopeful that these storytelling teams are going to put on these events where people are going to share stories about belonging in schools and access to healthcare, or that they won't just feel good at the moment, but they'll be filling a really deep need for more community connection on a much bigger level, and will be able to create these networks that will grow and bring more people in who are not taking action now or are still struggling to understand the extent of what we're dealing with.
One Quick Thing brings you easy, actionable ways to support your local community in times where we need it most. If you're feeling overwhelmed and don't know where to start, join us on this journey as we make meaningful connections with local businesses, organizations, and neighbors. Today we are joined by Linds Jakows, co-founder of 603 Equality. They address misinformation about gender-affirming care and share the importance of storytelling when breaking down barriers.
The idea is, we know that it's really successful when people share their personal stories, and that's the thing that ultimately changes hearts and minds. Like we know that we have the facts and figures on our side, but that's not something that breaks through on its own. It's most people even today still think they haven't met somebody who's transgender, and of course they have, they just don't know it. But really telling our personal stories can help not everybody, not the people that are, make it their mission in life to go to the state house and spread all kinds of lies about us, but some people that, are genuinely busy and confused and have heard, some from our side, some from the other side, and don't know what to think, and maybe don't have people in their lives who they're talking to about to these issues. So we are helping people form storytelling events where trans and non-binary people will be sharing stories about accessing healthcare and trying to find belonging in schools. And we're going to need more than just the people who will be willing to share their stories at those events. We need people doing community outreach to get a good audience there who's excited to learn more. We also have people, we need people to think through logistics and venues and food and childcare, and we're able to stipend people that are doing the, pretty emotional thing and sharing their stories, and also cover food and childcare to make it more possible for people to attend. And so the goal is to have these as events in a couple different areas of the state, but not to just say we had a great event and now let's all go home. The idea is to keep building a team that's going to come together and meet and talk about how we could take more action on the state and local level. So I'm really, really excited to be bringing more people into this project. A lot of pride groups have shared our storytelling event. It's on all of our social media, and even if you're not able to join this Wednesday, the teams that start to form this Wednesday are going to be looking to bring in more and more people from those communities to help out. So I'm really excited. I think this is really the work that we need to do to grow our movement for the long term, and not just focus on just the bills that are immediately in front of us.
Talking to people like you that are doing this work always makes me feel better as a person who's not engaged in this way. And I think a lot of our listeners aren't quite as engaged. And so knowing, we just hear about all the bad news, but knowing that the incredible amount of work that is going in, not just to knock down these bad bills, as you're saying, but to really build long-term community and long-term understanding and a healthier perspective for our whole community is just so inspiring for me to see personally. So I'm just excited to talk to you today. So I'm so glad that you're here.
Thanks. I'm really excited too.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the work that you're doing is so incredible. And so I really want to know, what did your early days as an activist look like?
Yeah, so I grew up far away from New Hampshire in Phoenix, Arizona, actually, the first 18 years of my life through high school. And, I identify as non-binary. I use they, them pronouns, but that wasn't something that I had the language for when I was in middle or high school. I felt uncomfortable going through puberty, but I didn't fully understand why. And when I was in high school, I realized that I liked girls, but I wasn't ready to tell a bunch of people yet, especially my dad, who I knew was really conservative Catholic and wasn't going to handle that well. But unfortunately, he did find out by invading my privacy, and he found some letters between me and my complicated best friend, and told me that if I wanted to go or to college, it had to be a Christian university that was very narrow in its beliefs, so not affirming LGBTQ. So I ended up going to a school called Pepperdine in Malibu, California, which a lot of people don't know is a small denomination called Church of Christ. That's very different from the Progressive United Church of Christ. And they didn't allow a student-run LGBTQ organization on campus to exist at all.
And this isn't that long ago.
Yeah, I graduated college in 2012. So, that was still. I registered to vote against Prop 8 in California, thinking that that was as a done deal and I was just going to be part of history, and then being really surprised when it ended up passing and for a short time banning same-sex marriage in California. But I felt really isolated as a student there. But by the time I was a junior, I got a group of friends together, some who were out, some who were more closeted, and we started meeting in library study rooms, each other's dorms, and start thinking about what could a group look like. And we crafted a club constitution that we thought seemed really, really reasonable, but the administration ultimately shot us down and said that the only group they would recognize would be one that said all queer people had to be celibate for the rest of their lives.
I'm so sorry that had to happen, or that happened.
It was definitely a tough environment to be in for college, but it definitely taught me a lot about organizing in a tough place. And it didn't get recognized while I was a student there, but we raised a lot of hell, and we got all of the graduate schools to endorse a group. We got a lot of departments. We got the student government to do a poll that said a majority of students supported a group, and we got a lot of media attention for that. And that really made me realize that I wanted to organize after I graduated. I was interested in politics, but I didn't really know what I could do in that realm beyond like researching policy or something like that. And then sort of accidentally stumbled on this thing of getting a group of people together to speak their truth to a small group of people at the top who were really trying to silence us, and started realizing that a whole lot of issues worked that way. And so my first job out of college, I was moved to Colorado for a short time, and then Massachusetts to work with students on college campuses around voter registration, environmental issues, or things like that. And so I ended up in Massachusetts, and then I found a group that was working to get big money out of politics, and also seeing increasingly small groups of people at the top trying to silence the voices of everybody else. And so that's how I moved to New Hampshire just over 10 years ago, and was really unsure about it at first, and had just come out as non-binary when I first moved here, and had to start from scratch and building my community all over again. But it took time, but it really paid off. And I really built a lot of community, and I'm just so grateful to be able to do this work now and to be building an organization that is going to meet this really tough moment we're in.
Yeah. So the organization you're talking about that you built, is that 603 Equality?
Yeah. So 603 Equality came into being about 2 years ago. Really, we just started seeing as the pandemic hit, it just so much more legislation trying to push back on the rights of LGBTQ people, particularly trans people. And I think that a lot of the misinformation and conspiracy theories that arose in that time, and, people saying that, it's somehow an affront to freedom to be asked to wear a mask at school, but we get to tell other people what to do with their bodies and healthcare, or somehow, I think there was a backlash. Unfortunately, I worked in 2017 and 2018 for a national organization that was working to pass a non-discrimination bill for trans people in New Hampshire, so that trans people would be protected in employment, housing, and public spaces. And at that time, it felt like learning about trans people was a little new. Obviously, we've existed forever since the beginning of time, but it felt like people were more genuinely open to learning at that moment. And then, unfortunately, the other side had time to, orchestrate their misinformation campaigns, and we were hit with all this backlash of these sports bans, these forced outing bills, and now healthcare bans that we're seeing. So there's a lot of work to do, but I'm so heartened by new people getting involved every day in this work.
Yeah. So what does 603 Equality do?
So 603 Equality is the statewide political advocacy group for LGBTQ people. So, of course, sometimes we speak out against horrible federal policy, which is increasingly attacking us every day. But for the most part, we believe that the most change can be made on the state and local level here in New Hampshire. It's a lot easier to communicate directly with one of the 400 state reps, or sometimes people have 3 or 4 state reps. It's much easier to communicate with them than it is to get Congress to do something good these days. Yeah. And then on the local level, that's even more direct, speaking with your school board members, your town councilors, city councilors. And so we primarily fight for good bills to be passed that increase freedom and safety for LGBTQIA people. And we fight back against attacks on our freedom and safety at the state level. And then we also want to be helpful to communities that are facing this at the local level, especially school boards. Mm-hmm. So sometimes our communities will tell us, this member on my school board is looking to pass a bathroom ban or something like that. And we help people testify in a similar way as they do at the State House to their local school board.
Yeah. When I was looking at all of the things that your organization does, you do all this incredible work combating so much negativity, but you also create so much positivity for the community. And that's really beautiful. I know we were chatting about it before, but the range and the scope of work that you do is truly astounding. So it was just really exciting getting to dig into that a little bit more.
Exactly. There's a lot that we don't want to happen in the world, but at the same time, we don't want to be spending all of our time. We hope that there will come a day when we won't have to spend so much time and energy on all of these attacks, and we can actually focus on building a world at the same time where everybody has what they need and no one feels like they're fighting with another group of people for the slice of a pie.
Yeah, which nobody should have to do. Can you tell me a little bit more about the gender affirming care portion of your work?
Yeah, so we partnered with the Reproductive Freedom Fund that has been doing an amazing job funding abortion care all across the state. And we recognized and took inspiration from some other funds that knew that there was just as much need to fund gender affirming care directly. And I think just a moment on the term gender affirming care. I think sometimes people hear that term and they think it's something special or extra for trans people, but it's really just basic health care. It's the healthcare that people need that's medically necessary and often life-saving. And so we decided that we were going to fund no questions asked, no, proof of income required or anything like that. 100% of costs at the Lovering Health Center on the Seacoast and the Equality Health Center in Concord for anyone who needs gender affirming and care at those locations. And they're also able to cover things like Ubers or ride shares for folks that don't have reliable transportation. And at Equality Health Center, it's also able to cover counseling and as well. So mental health care, not just physical health care. And we know that people just need to meet their basic needs before they can think about doing anything extra like advocacy. And so we want to help people meet those basic needs before we're asking them to do anything more.
Yeah.
I would, a lot of our listeners are coming to this conversation from different places and different levels of education. I'd love to hear, you mentioned talking about gender affirming care a little bit. I would love to talk a little bit more about why that's so important. And like in your work, I'm sure you see how that support can like change the trajectory of somebody's life or really change their outlook. Can you share a little bit more for somebody maybe who hasn't encountered this conversation before and about why that matters so much to people and why what you're doing matters so much?
Totally. So, I first want to say that just every trans and non-binary person is different, and, what might be essential for one person might not be for another person. It's very individual, but many trans people who are lucky enough to have the support of their families and know who they are from a young age, or might start on puberty blockers around the onset of puberty. And that is simply a pause button that it allows as a young person to just have more time to figure things out and to not go through the trauma of going through the wrong puberty. So for a transgender girl who would go through male puberty without puberty blockers, that can be really traumatic. Growing, additional hair, people feel like they're not who they're supposed to be. And so puberty blockers can be a really life-saving thing for a lot of young people. And it's also something that non-transgender or young people can access. So some people go through puberty way too early and their bodies aren't ready for it. And so they go on puberty blockers. They're prescribed by a doctor so that they or have some more time before they're ready to go through that. And then, if that's working out and they want to continue in their transition, they might start hormone replacement therapy with testosterone or estrogen, or, after a couple years later into their teens. Or none of this is ever happening for, someone who is as earlier than their teen years. What I've never been on hormones myself. That's not right for me as a non-binary person, but what I've heard from lots of trans people is that they just finally feel like their hormone levels are where they're meant to be all along, and there's just such a sense of calm and peace that comes with that. It's not usually a prescribed for teenagers to have or top surgery, but sometimes that is possible. And prescribed care from their doctors. And that's something that I had when I was just shy of 26. Or because, you know, from the time I started going through puberty, I felt really uncomfortable with my chest, and now feel a million times happier with a flat chest, and didn't know that that was something that I could do as a non-binary person. And so I just remember feeling so stuck, and like I just had to put up with it and shove those feelings down. I watched these very surgery-focused documentaries about trans men when I was a teenager, and was like, oh, if only I was a man, but I'm not, so I can't get that. And then I started meeting other non-binary people in my early 20s who were able to access top surgery, and decided that that was something that I wanted and needed. But it's not just as easy as, you know, showing up and saying I want top surgery. Like, I had to be in therapy for a year before I could get a letter of recommendation from my therapist. I was really lucky to have my mom's insurance at the time. The reason I got it right before I turned 26 was so I could use her insurance. And that covered about $4,000, and then I had to pay another $4,000 out of pocket, and wasn't making that much money at the time. And so I was saving every single penny I possibly could over the course of a year to afford that. So there are so many barriers, even if you are able to have an insurance plan that covers it, or the support of your family. And it's really devastating that there are some legislators that are trying to come up with even more barriers in the process.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for the specifics and like getting into it, because I think there's so much misinformation around this topic right now. And I think there's so much, there's just so many fear tactics used. And when you talk about the specifics, you know, you're talking about the hormone blockers and the puberty blockers, and it is a pause button. And I don't think we talk about that enough, and people are so quick to kind of get spooked, right? And I think us all having this information to be able to combat those that misinformation, I think, is so important. And just the joy element is so important too. It's like people are entitled to feel comfortable in their body. And so, yeah, I think your work is amazing. And I thank you for sort of getting into some of the specifics.
Yeah, of course. It's our stories like this that make that change, and no one should feel pressured or obligated to reveal that part of themselves. But I certainly feel comfortable doing it, and it's my labor of love. So.
Yeah. We were talking about last week when Josie was here, we were talking about, you know, putting a face to it, and, you know, just talking about you as a person just makes any issue that, you know, people are having a hard time wrapping their head around. It just makes it a little bit more personal, which for some reason makes it really more palatable and understandable for folks. So I think, yeah, sharing that story is really powerful.
Yeah, I wish I could. I've written poems about my top surgery experience. I wish that I had more than 2 or 3 minutes to go before a committee, and it's hard to sometimes convey all of that joy and hit all the points you want to make in that short of a time. But I just want to convey every single day that it's been the biggest positive and the best money I've ever spent on myself.
Yeah. That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that with us. So you were just mentioning that you have to go before the committees. What are the things that are coming up this week or next week, I believe, that in regards to the LGBTQ plus community?
Yeah. So Monday, March 3rd at 9:30, we have a proposed ban on puberty blockers and hormones for only transgender young people. And so we'll have a lot of people showing up and sharing their stories at that hearing. And then on Monday afternoon at 1 p.m., there's a proposed ban on top surgery for transgender or young people. And it's funny because I was talking to a friend who had top surgery, and she actually shared a family member, they actually shared a family member or who is a cisgender male, not transgender, was starting to grow breasts and had the same exact surgery to reduce as their dysphoria based on that. However, they don't want to ban that possibility. It's only seemingly a problem when transgender or non-binary people do it. So there's a lot of hypocrisy based in these bills, but ultimately it's about the freedom to control your own body and control your own life, and the decision that you make that's extremely private, just like abortion care with your doctor in that room, and nobody else gets a say in that matter. So that's really what it comes down to for me.
There's a lot of this legislative activity happening right now in New Hampshire. Does it match your experience as someone who's lived here for a long time? Do you feel like it's representative of what the population wants? Or do you feel like this is just, we're seeing our legislators just take this like wild turn out into no man's land?
Yeah, I think our legislators are really out of step with the general public, and we see that really frequently when we look at who's signing in to register their opinion on these bills. So anyone can go to the State House website, and you have until midnight the day after the bill is heard to register your opinion if you support or oppose as the bill. And so anyone can do that. And what we're seeing for the bathroom ban bill last week, there were over 2,000 people that signed in opposed to that bill, and only around 200 that signed in support of that bill. So, and then when we had testimony, we had around 50 people testifying against it and fewer than 10 for it. So when you actually ask the people what they want, it's pretty clear that they agree that freedom means the right to control your own body and your life. And there's about a billion things that I can think of that are more important for legislators to be spending their time on.
That's something that upsets, not to get all fired up, but like that makes me upset, right? As like, I'm a citizen of New Hampshire, I'm a parent, I have a lot of concerns with very real problems we're having in the state. And I mentioned this earlier, I spent a couple of hours watching the legislative session last week where they were talking about this bathroom bill. And it was just so compelling to see all these people sharing their stories, and parents and teachers. And it was really powerful. But also I was like, what a waste of fucking time, right? Like, this is not how we should be using all of this energy and this force for good and legislative power to be going through this stuff that is just only harmful. It's so hard for me to wrap my head around why we're doing this. But I think the work that you're doing is so important, and getting people to show up and sign in online and to sit in those seats. We've spoken to a lot of our guests about how inaccessible it is to testify in front of these committees because it's the winter and it's New Hampshire, and it is, you have childcare needs, you have all these things that prevent you from getting there. But I think, to be clear, we'll put links in our show notes for all these bills for people to sign in for for you mentioned there's some good bills too that we want to support, and we want to make sure that we're mobilizing people to participate in this process. And it lit a fire under my ass to be a better participant in that system. There was a woman I remember that testified in that hearing I was watching that was like, she's like, I have no horse in this race. I just think this is really stupid. And I was like, yes. And I think more of us should be doing that, right? Of like, how do we, even if we don't necessarily personally have a horse in that race, like, we need to make it our business, right?
Absolutely.
So how would you recommend people best get involved in this process?
Yeah, I really like what you said about not needing to have a horse in this race. Like, I think that there are a lot of really well-meaning allies that support this in theory, but feel like maybe it's not their place to take up space and to testify. But trans people are absolutely exhausted right now, and we need literally every single person that cares about this and is on our side showing up and speaking out, whether that's in a hearing room, but even more so importantly when you're just with your friends in the places you go every day, like starting conversations with parents in a PTA, or if you go to a faith, a house of faith that's affirming or not, like starting conversations with people and letting them know that you stand with LGBTQ people and demystifying and debunking all of the harmful myths that are thrown our way. And once people express that they're with you, encouraging them to take actions, sending them links to email their reps, sending them links to sign in. It's also great in many parts of New Hampshire. Some legislators are really accessible and have like a time when they're like, I'm getting coffee at this cafe. Come meet me. Come talk to me about what you're concerned about. And 603 Equality is also really happy to help coordinate meetings with legislators to educate them, because in New Hampshire, they're volunteers. Essentially, they make $100 a year, because way back when we never tied that to inflation at all. And so they don't have staff. They don't have time to research every single bill that comes in front of them. And so they're really dependent on us, who they work for, to catch them up to speed and to help them do their homework.
I love what you said about this being, conversations that we need to have, whether it is with the legislators, with your family, with your friends. And something we've talked about before is that these conversations that happen, over dinner tables or at a cafe, people feel a little anxious kind of going into those conversations, maybe, wanting to mitigate any sort of tension. Do you have language that you feel like you use that sort of works with most people, that people aren't really going to argue against when talking about these issues?
I would really approach conversations really individually and try to connect on shared values. So if somebody talks a lot of talk about freedom, like that needs to apply equally to our community as well. And so, I wouldn't really go into any conversation with like preconceived ideas or talking points. I would, try to share stories of, real people that I know, or, it also accounts, if you watch a documentary or, you see a video clip on your social media or feed, sharing that as a conversation starter. And I always like to ask more questions than I, give more information, because as somebody's probably not going to come around if they just think that you're just monologuing at them. It can come off as sort of lecturing sometimes. And so I would just really ask people, about their experiences and their values, and try to connect on what's shared in that sense, and knowing that like one conversation isn't necessarily going to like automatically overnight like change their hearts and minds. Or my mom used to have very different politics than she does today, and that's the result of lots and lots of conversations over many years with her, and really just listening and just letting them know that you're someone who's safe to like ask maybe difficult questions too.
I think that's such a good point about making yourself or making ourselves somebody that's like safe to ask those questions to and have those conversations with, because you're right. It's like you do have to kind of chip away at these preconceived notions. And I liked what you said about, maybe you saw something on social media or you watched a documentary, and that's where it's our job as people who maybe consider ourselves to be allies to actually be doing that work of learning, right? And it's nice to say, in theory, I support this stuff, but actually spending the time with those stories and spending the time to understand the details of what we're talking about when we're talking about puberty blockers or things like this, like actually taking the time to learn. That way, when we're hearing these BS stories that are being thrown around, we can have the confidence to say, that's actually not true, or, you know, here's what I think you're actually trying to get at. There's so much misinformation that's happening right now. Do you find that there's anything, I know each individual conversation has to be very different, but are there themes that are coming up a lot right now that you could maybe help debunk or give us some tidbits of what conversations you're seeing continue to come up in recent weeks or months?
Yeah, I mean, I think the healthcare stuff is you know, really big right now, but also there's you know, some confusion and nuance around some of what's happening in schools. So for the last several years, a certain set of anti-trans legislators have tried to pass these bills that would require anyone who works in a public school to be required to forcibly out LGBTQ students who may not be safe in coming out to their family members at that point. And, you know, I think that parental rights is something that sounds good and is hard to argue with, but it's really become this weapon. And so, of course, we think parents should have rights. They do have many rights in the law. And so a lot of these bills will be very redundant about listing a whole bunch of parental rights that are already enshrined in law, and then trying to sneak in a line about this forced outing at school. And so some people will be like, you know, most of this bill looks pretty fine and I'm in favor of it. But when you really get down to it, of course, you know, parents and educators should have really good communication systems and just general open lines of communication. But when I was in high school, I came out to my favorite teacher and said, you know, I'm not ready to tell my dad. And she respected that. It's not her job to report on every little update in my life, especially when it's not harmful to myself or anybody else. Her job was to teach me econ and AP government. Like, but yeah, I think it just speaks to overburdening teachers and trying to, you know, have this hunt for anybody who is, you know, erring on the side of protecting a kid that may honestly be kicked out of their home. That still does happen. We've had organizations like Waypoint testifying that 25% of the young people in their shelters are LGBTQ. And so we do know that that is still happening, and we want to prevent it and keep people safe. And so SB 96 and HB 10 are two bills that currently written would forcibly out LGBTQ students and sometimes penalize teachers to the point of fines or taking credentials away or saying they violated the code of conduct. And so, it's taken quite a bit to explain some of those steps to something that otherwise might sound harmless on the surface.
That's such a good point. And I think is important for all of us to internalize that on this topic and other topics, that a lot of these really harmful bills that we're seeing right now are sort of buried. The harmful part is buried intentionally, right? It's done intentionally so that we're all like, this is fine. It's Trojan horse energy. Like, we're sneaking this horrible thing under there. Do you find that, is that, you know, we're talking about New Hampshire specifically today, but do you find that that's a theme with a lot of the anti-trans or anti-LGBTQ legislation that we're seeing across the country right now? Is that something that people should be like really looking out for and looking out for, like, when we're having these conversations, like a lot of these bills are kind of built in a way that's a little bit shitty?
Yeah, I really spend most of my time on New Hampshire, but I do know that across the country, a lot of places are seeing the same things as we are, and sometimes they say the quiet part out loud, and sometimes they don't. And sometimes they pretend that they just want to chip away at a little bit of healthcare. Like last summer when when New Hampshire passed a ban on surgery for trans girls that very rarely happens anyways. And as soon as they passed that, I knew that they would come for puberty blockers and hormones and top surgery. And I'm not at all surprised. And what we are seeing from other states is states that have successfully banned that for young people. They're now trying to raise the age into 20s or even beyond. Sometimes they'll pretend that they just want, a small ban. They love to call it a restriction, but these are all 100% bans.
I think this is such a good conversation, and this is so important for people to hear this stuff, is that, I see these I literally was like reading a conversation people were having about this on Facebook today, and people get kind of tricked into this, like, oh, well, it's just a well-meaning thing, and it's just this like baby step. They're not coming after all, the whole queer community. It's nothing like that. But what we've seen time and time again is it's these incremental steps where it's like the government seeing how far it can infringe upon our personal rights in this way. And anytime we give them an inch, they will take another mile. And so it's so important for all of us to be speaking out against this, because it ultimately impacts a lot of people, and it's just it's really disingenuous. Yeah. That's it. I just think it's fucked up.
It is fucked up.
But yeah, and I think that the school piece is like an entry point, right? It's like they're using that because it gets people wound up. It's like they're using the oh, well, it's, for of course the kids shouldn't be having these crazy surgeries, and it's like, just stop for a second. Like, you're saying things that aren't true. And also we're using the topic of children to get each other all riled up. I saw somebody today who was, they were talking about sports, and they're like, well, I thought we all supported women's rights, and what about our girls who are competing in sports? And it's like, that's what they want you to think. Like, you're falling for this disingenuous line of thinking that's not true. Like, none of this is real. And I just can't imagine how that must feel, sort of dealing with this on a day-to-day basis, as your work and your personal life.
Yeah, the other side loves to pretend that they speak for all women when we know that the vast majority of women athletes stand strongly in favor of including trans women in sports, and that all of these bills are rooted in so much misunderstanding about people's bodies and what it means to do well in sports. There are so many different variables. I'm not a very sporty person. I was obsessed with figure skating in elementary and middle school, and, had way loftier dreams of doing well, and that than my parents' budget was ever going to allow. But, the things that help people do well in sports is often coaching. It's often, and can you afford the best coaches and practice times? And it has absolutely nothing to do with your size or your height or any of these other wild assumptions that we make about people's bodies. And this is not new. For many years, there have been, especially women of color, especially Black women, who have been and seen as too masculine and tried to be prevented from participating in sports with white women. And so this is just the newest iteration of that kind of bigotry and lack of inclusion, and we need to be really clear-sighted about what it is.
Yeah. So we've been talking about so much of the hateful things that you have to combat. and the incredible work that you're doing. And we had mentioned earlier that you also create some really wonderful things. Can you tell us a bit about the event that's coming up next week?
Yeah, next week on Wednesday, March 5th, in the evening at 6:30 on Zoom, we are launching a really exciting project, our storytelling project, where we're going to be helping people form teams in 4 key areas of the state. So the North Country, Manchester, the Seacoast, and the Kearsarge region, which is like off I-89, like not quite Upper Valley, but towns like Bradford, Sutton, New London. And I think so many of us, whether it was as around the end of January or, all these executive orders that have come out in the last week, just feel so downtrodden, so alone, and scared to look at our phones for the next headline. But I think the answer to that is really deep community building, and not just going to a queer event where, or, you might need to travel a couple of hours depending on what part of New Hampshire you live in, but actually getting to know your friends and your neighbors and having people that you can call on if you need somebody to deliver you a meal or to dig you out of the snow if your plow doesn't come around, and just as care for each other on a really basic level. And so I'm hopeful that these storytelling teams that are going to put on these events where people are going to share stories about belonging in schools and access to healthcare, that they won't just feel good at the moment, but they'll be filling a really deep need for more community connection on a much bigger level, and I'll be able to create these networks that will grow and bring more people in who are not taking action now or are still struggling to understand the extent of what we're dealing with.
So who all should get involved with this kind of event, and how, and we'll include links and stuff like that, but are you looking for people outside the community? Like, how can allies kind of show up for either this effort or other efforts, as this is such a intense time?
Yeah. Trans people, non-binary people, allies, all are welcome. Or sometimes it can feel so good, having and someone and, sign up and be sort of your honorary mom who takes care of the food or the child care, or invites some well-meaning church ladies who maybe have never met somebody who's trans before, but have been, watched a documentary like Will and Harper on Netflix or something like that, and want really badly to learn more. And, I'm meeting people like that at the State House sometimes, but we need to make it easier and meet people where they're at in their communities, and not just expect people to be able to take time off in the middle of their day. And so anyone who lives and works in any of the areas where we're organizing, or even a little bit outside of some of those areas, is really welcome to join our storytelling and launch. And it might seem a little daunting what we're doing at first, but we can all do it together if we put our heads together, put our hands together, and get it done. And I'm really excited to see how these groups are going to grow. I think this is the glue that we need to stick together.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So as that community comes together, whether it's people that are local or people that are on the other side of the country, what's one quick thing that you would recommend folks do to get involved with the LGBTQ community and organizations?
Send those emails, sign those petitions, show up when you can, try to speak directly to your legislators when you can, but also get involved locally, like serve on a PTA board, or, consider running for town council or something like that, because as those local positions matter and sometimes have more influence in people's daily lives than higher level elected officials do. And just keep talking to everyone you know about what you care about.
That's great advice.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.